Welcome, everyone. We'll give it another minute. I think there's still people filing in. All right, it's 4:02. I think we're gonna go ahead and get started here, and I'm sure we'll have some people still arriving as we speak here, but we'll get the boring part out of the way. And I want to take a moment and welcome everyone, and thank you for coming out today. My name is Scott France. I'm the Executive Director of the Montgomery County Planning Commission, and I'm really excited today to present to you our second major event in the 2021 Planning Smarter series. We're just happy to be here as we didn't get to do this series back in 2020 for the well-known reasons that we try not to mention as little as possible. But today's session and its format is unique for us here at MCPC. Typically, we program these events around a more singular focus or issue like controlling stormwater on private property or transit-oriented development. By the way, those are two Planning Smarter events for later this year. Never too early to shamelessly plug. But coming out of the struggle that was 2020, we recognized more than ever that flexibility and the need to react quickly to situations had to be part of our approach. So the idea to dedicate one of the Planning Smarter events to a collection of topics that were of interest to our planning colleagues, municipal partners, and the general public became the start of a new tradition today, which is Hot Topics. Today's group of mini sessions were chosen at the last possible moment to be relevant to our audience with the goal of sparking interest or solutions to some of the emerging challenges that are facing communities in Montgomery County. The four mini sessions today will cover, starting off, the booming market for multifamily apartments and how it's impacting many of our towns throughout the county. Then we'll shift to another residential aspect dealing with climate change and the impact of energy usage. We'll be looking at cutting edge practices in the creation of sustainable housing units as these impacts continue to affect everyone's lives. And we have a couple of great guests that are actually walking the walk in this avenue and built housing that they're going to talk about today. And our third item will be reevaluating and advancing social equity and local comprehensive planning efforts to assure that all voices are heard in the planning process and incorporated into the implementation phase. And we have another guest joining us who has been through a really unique experience in Lansdale that we're excited to hear about. And then finally, we're going to share strategies to support our commercial centers, which have been hit hard by the pandemic, as well as the heightened paradigm shifts that we're seeing in the retail sector. And that's going to be a fully focused look at different elements to help out those corridors. So I hope that each of you came here this afternoon after seeing one of the topics being offered or more than one, and that you leave with having gained some insight and useful ideas on that topic. But I'll be even more excited if you hear something else today that maybe wasn't on your mind or what brought you here, but it also prompts an idea, provokes a thought, or plants a seed toward an action or challenge in your community. In a moment, you'll begin hearing from an array of our very talented staff at the Planning Commission, along with a few terrific guests that have interesting experiences to share. First, I just want to clarify the format a little bit. We're going to go through these four mini sessions one by one, and I promise each will be less than 20 minutes each. Then at the end, we're going to run two periods of breakout sessions where we'll have Q&A opportunities for you to interact with the presenters and the guests, and ask any specific questions that you'd like to bring forward. The format of that will be that we'll have two of the topics going at once. So there'll be 2 breakout rooms. And for example, the first session, as you can see on the agenda here, Q&A session 1 will be topics A and B in alternate rooms. So you'll have to pick one or the other to start out with, but you can go back and forth between the rooms at your own desire or convenience if you have multiple interests or questions to ask. Likewise, we'll do a second session, and that'll cover topics C and D simultaneously. And then we'll let you go all of this hopefully by around 5:45. I'll hold off on further instructions until we get to that point in the program. But I also want to emphasize during the presentations, we're doing this in a meeting format in order to have the breakout rooms later. So use the chat box if you'd like to pose a question to the presenters and hear more about. We won't answer those questions at the moment in that presentation, but we'll have them queued up and ready to go for the presenters to address when we get to the breakout session for that topic. So don't be shy on that, and we'll get to it at the end. And then finally, one quick note, just to make your experience work ideally. If you're in most people's formats using Zoom, you'll know that you have the view icon at the upper right part of the screen. If you set that to side-by-side speaker, we'll be spotlighting the different speakers, and I think that'll be most effective in the presentation of both the presenters and the PowerPoints along with them. So just sort of advice there if you want to set it up to go along with us. And then finally, I want to let you know that we are recording this event, and we will post it on our Planning Smarter webpage. We're also going to post a PDF of all the presentations that you see today. So if you missed something or didn't jot something down, don't worry. We'll have it all up by the end of tomorrow on our page, which is montgopa.org/planning smarter, all one word. So let's go. Let's begin with our first session. I want to introduce from the MCPC staff, we have Dan Farina, who's a senior county planner with MCPC since 2016. And he'll be joined by Marley Bice, a principal community planner too, who's been with us since 2012. Take it away, Dan. Yep, Dan, your microphone is off. It looks like you're not muted, but we don't hear anything.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. Hello, and welcome everybody to the discussion of multifamily housing trends and impacts in Montgomery County. As Scott said, my name is Dan Farina, and I'm going to be speaking alongside today with Marley Bice. We're going to be discussing first a little bit multifamily's history of development in the county, as well as some of the current development scenarios that we see emerging in various locations across it. Later, we're going to touch on the impacts that are of concern for most residents and municipalities when considering this type of development. The reason we really brought you here today, though, is because demographically what we're seeing is that many households seeking units do not contain children anymore for various reasons and will necessitate a different housing product than in the past to meet the market. As the county builds out and finds itself with less land for single-family developments, it is likely to increasingly turn to multifamily alternatives to meet that changing market. Over a quarter of the housing units in the county are multifamily, but they weren't built at once or in any one period. The county has a long history with this housing type going back to the turn of the 20th century. It has waxed and waned in popularity among home builders, but general today, it is the single largest category of housing being built within the county. So in order to understand where it is going, we're going to take a little look at where it has been. Multifamily housing got its start in the county in the early 1900s in places like Ardmore, Bryn Mawr, and Elkins Park. Most developments were concentrated in town centers oriented around rail stops within the eastern half of the county. Apartments were constructed for both rent and ownership. Ownership was typically through a cooperative, and they generally had an average of 50 units or less. Many developments were geared towards commuters to Philadelphia and others seeking to transition into home ownership in the next few years. So a lot of young couples and young families were the primary market. Units were anywhere from studios to 3 and 4 bedrooms, and oftentimes even contained things like servants' quarters because at the time they were geared towards middle and upper middle class residents, not too unlike today. Moving into the 50s, during the post-war housing boom, multifamily development began to surge and spread farther afield in the county. Over half of the county's multifamily units were built during this time period, and some were located away from some of the traditional transit lines and oriented towards drivers, but not all of them. Many developments contained an average of 100 or more units, and everything from 10-story apartment towers to 2-story garden complexes that were built during this time across a variety of sites and contexts. Units were larger during this period generally, and were often characterized by having a lot more personal outdoor space, things like balconies and patios, in addition to amenity complexes on site. So things like pools, playgrounds, trails, and other amenities became common fixtures during this era. Most developments were geared towards the wider market, composed of singles, couples, and young families, and this was done mainly to meet the surging demand for housing from the greatest generation and the earliest boomers. Development patterns shifted from the 1980s onwards and were characterized by lower density sprawl, especially in places like Montgomery County. Therefore, multifamily construction was lower during this time period relative to single family units. The 1990s in particular saw the lowest amount of multifamily housing units constructed since 1930. Infill projects began to pick up steam and became more common across the county, especially in built out eastern sections of it. Larger developments were the norm, oftentimes containing more than 150 units. Developments at this time were also geared towards younger professionals and smaller families seeking flexible alternatives to the dominant detached housing that was being produced at the time. The last 10 years have seen a shift in housing development patterns within the county. The dominant form of housing construction today is multifamily, and that shift took place over this last decade. Multifamily development has spread to all four corners of the county, while simultaneously starting to concentrate in places like Ballackinwood and King of Prussia. Nearly all of the developments during this period were over 50 units, with very few smaller ones being built. A stark difference between this era and previous eras is the emphasis on smaller units with less bedrooms and much larger amenity complexes with more varied offerings. Most developments are luxury and fixture, rentals, and geared towards younger singles and couples, or even downsizing empty nesters. This last decade saw the early effects of a shift in the demographic profile of home buyers and renters. As mentioned earlier, many of these households do not contain children for various reasons and will necessitate a different housing product than in the past. I'm going to now turn it over to Marley, who's going to talk a little bit about the common development scenarios that are emerging within the county.
Thanks, Dan. Good afternoon, everyone. As Dan mentioned, we are starting to see an increase in multifamily proposals, but unlike the standalone apartment complexes of the second half of the 20th century, we're seeing multifamily proposed more often in places where we have existing infrastructure. The first three scenarios I'm going to touch on are all examples of this, whether it's bringing new life to an office park by adding residential or increasing residential density around train stations through infill development. The fourth development scenario, mixed-use town centers, is something we're seeing more outside of the inner ring suburbs where there's perhaps more developable land still available. Next. Taking a closer look at where these proposals are located, this map shows multifamily development proposals, both sketch plans, which aren't required by all municipalities, and preliminary plans. For larger multifamily proposals only, we're looking at 40 or more units per development here. And we have it overlaid with employment centers, those purple shapes, as well as major roads and rail lines. A lot of the recently proposed development, especially in the eastern half of the county, is gravitating towards established employment centers and transit-oriented areas. You can see Lower Merion, Narberth, King of Prussia, Collegeville area, Lansdale, Fort Washington, just to name a few. Next. As I mentioned, we feel that many of the recent multifamily proposals fall into one of four common development scenarios. Across the county's business parks, we're seeing a trend towards allowing multifamily with the goal of encouraging revitalization, and with it, the provision of improvements such as trails and open space, or pedestrian safety and transit enhancements. And this has the benefit of creating a live, work, play atmosphere within the formerly single-use business parks where it's fun to work and play. And this is important because with this shift away from 9-to-5 office jobs, the county's business parks are working to position themselves as active mixed-use places that would be attractive to both residents and office workers. Next. Another common development scenario we're seeing is transit-oriented development, or TOD for short. We're seeing both infill development and redevelopment of entire blocks, or in the case of the Madison Lansdale Station development on the bottom right, this is an example of redevelopment of a former surface parking lot right next to a train station. So by taking advantage of the valuable land near our county's dozens of train stations and permitting greater residential density in these areas, we can encourage transit ridership and decrease automobile trips generated by this type of development. Also, we're seeing a lot of our communities focusing on TOD as an economic development strategy, especially since many of our stations are located in established town centers. Existing businesses in these town centers can actually benefit from having new residents and greater density nearby. Next, please. Shopping mall redevelopment is another area where we're seeing interest in adding residential. And this scenario is perhaps newer in our county. We've seen several proposals recently, but not too many completed projects yet. This example is the Delwyn Apartments at the Bella Cynwyd Shopping Center in Lower Merion. And this apartment complex was recently completed as part of the beginning of a master plan to create more of a mixed-use district on the large site, which is accessible to both rail and bus transit. Overall, we're seeing a shift away from brick and mortar retail, which does create an opportunity for new uses on our many shopping mall sites. And as you can see from the Bella Cynwyd Shopping Center example, these places are often already transit hubs and community gathering places, which make them logical places to locate more residential. Next. The fourth development scenario we're seeing is more common outside of our inner ring suburbs, where we're seeing larger new retail centers proposed. It's no longer a standalone shopping mall or strip shopping center. Increasingly, we're seeing multifamily be incorporated into these projects, or in several projects recently, actually age-restricted housing being developed as part of a new mixed-use town center. So now I'm going to hand it back to Dan to talk about how to understand and address the impacts of multifamily projects.
All right, thanks, Marley. All right, we're going to shift gears a bit and talk about the impacts of existing and new multifamily developments. The impacts we're going to discuss today have been studied by the DVRPC, the MCPC, and other local organizations that, through the work that we do. We will first talk about the impact on school districts. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the traffic concerns before we get into the aesthetics and quality of life impacts. Marley will also touch on some of the best practices multifamily developments can utilize to fit better within the context of their given neighborhoods. So first up, we're going to discuss school district impacts. And our understanding of school district impacts comes from the MCPC School Enrollment Projection Program, of which we've studied over 14 districts in the county. Our own in-house housing characteristics study, which was completed in 2010, and some of the statistics from that you're seeing on the screen, as well as other local studies recently completed by the DVRPC. One of the chief concerns that the MCPC hears from communities regarding these impacts is that multifamily developments attract large amounts of students, and there's a certain logic to X amount of units produces Y amount of students. But generally, the nuance here is in what type of units are being provided. You can see that the ratio of students to single-family detached units is higher than the ratio for multifamily ones. The trend holds for existing units as well as new ones, which tend to have less students originating from them than older ones. On average in Monco, the average number of students in multifamily development of, say, 100 units would attract is around 6, whereas a comparatively sized detached development would attract nearly 93 students on average. Nowhere is this more felt than local government coffers. In addition to other fiscal and infrastructural efficiencies or savings, multifamily developments often provide more tax revenue per student than do single-family detached or attached. Lower Merion provides a number of good examples of this in a new tool that they've created for their residents to better understand multifamily development. And one of the most notable examples from that tool is that of the Royal Athena apartment complex along the School River in Lower Merion. It is a development that contains 275 1- and 2-bedroom apartments that are situated about a 10-minute walk from the Wissahickon train station via the Penfoyd Bridge. It also has a typical unit breakdown that we see in a lot of our similarly placed apartment complexes. They're in walkable, transit accessible places. It currently only produces about 28 students though, but over $900,000 in school district taxes. So after average per student costs are considered, the school district receives a net gain of funds from this property, similar to many other recently built complexes like it. Another common concern we hear in our work is that apartments bring more cars, congestion, and parking issues. A recent study by the DRPC has proven that location matters most when mitigating these traffic concerns related to this type of development. When a new apartment is sited in walkable, transit-adjacent, mixed-use town centers, it is much less likely to negatively impact local parking or traffic concerns than is often planned for using industry standards from places like the ITE or the Institute of Transportation Engineers. When looking at the table on the screen, you should note that in suburban PA, the average detached home contains nearly 2 cars, while studio or one-bedroom units contain less than 1. The only unit size that comes close to the amount of vehicles a detached home is likely to have are 3 bedrooms, and that is not a typical unit size that we see in new developments in the county. In addition, new multifamily units located in the same kind of neighborhoods we just discussed would also generate fewer car trips overall. The DRPC studied the parking and trip behaviors of various new apartment complexes across the region through observation and crunching census data. A number of new mid-rise Monco complexes were also included in that study. According to the research, even in suburban locations, the impacts of new multifamily development can be mitigated by putting those apartments in those same transit-oriented or walkable neighborhoods that we've been talking about. While many apartment residents will use a car to carry out their primary trip for the day or the work commute, they will likely utilize another form for secondary trips. These secondary trips are things like basic grocery shopping, picking up dry cleaning and prescriptions, as well as visiting local bars and restaurants. These trips, being taken by other means, can take pressure off of local parking spots and reduce overall traffic. I'm going to pass it back over on to Marley now, who is going to discuss the quality of life and aesthetic impacts.
Thanks, Dan. Another concern we hear a lot has to do with the type and scale of multifamily buildings, especially as these are not being developed as isolated projects anymore. Again, we're seeing them integrated into our downtowns, added to shopping malls, incorporated into business parks. And certainly some projects have done a better job of fitting into the existing community's scale and character than others, but we feel there are a few main best practices in terms of the design of multifamily buildings. Next. First of all, it's important to remember that multifamily buildings can come in a wide range of scales and types, and the municipality can encourage or regulate by building type to encourage multifamily buildings that fit into the existing community. There are many examples of historic preservation through adaptively reusing existing buildings as multifamily, creating smaller buildings with fewer units, such as the Reliance Crossing in Souderton Borough, which actually looks like a townhome community from the outside. We also have examples of infill buildings that fit into an established streetscape. Next. The design of the building and streetscape is also important in terms of the visual impact of the project. In most situations, multifamily buildings should be surrounded by pedestrian-oriented, high-use places. Wide sidewalks, landscaping, lighting, seating all contribute to a walkable environment and create places where people want to spend time. Next. Related to that, outdoor space is an important component of multifamily projects as well. And this is something we've seen a general shift towards. As Dan mentioned, developers are wanting to incorporate additional amenities, roof decks, dog parks, barbecue picnic areas, but also new developments can be incentivized to provide public space that the general community can benefit from. This is especially important to consider when you're seeing infill development come into existing town center areas. Next. In terms of the building itself, facade articulation and ground floor activation are important tools to help create visually attractive buildings and encourage pedestrian activity at the street level. Next. One building design technique in particular can be helpful to implement where you're anticipating infill development and where the new buildings may be taller than existing buildings. In this example from Ardmore, the new building maintains the established build-to line along the street, but then the building facade steps back 15 feet or so above the third floor to create that horizontal alignment with the adjoining building. This technique also has the benefit of reducing the feeling of the bulk of the building as viewed from the pedestrian's perspective. And now to wrap things up, I'll hand it back to Dan once again.
All right, thanks, Marlon. The chief takeaway that we wanted to leave you with from today, given our brief discussion, is that multifamily developments are here to stay, becoming more prevalent, and are not monolithic. They can be molded to fit within a range of contexts and scales. Today, we mainly focused on larger apartment developments and their impacts on communities, but there are a whole host of other smaller, nuanced forms of multifamily to explore further at scales that fit within all kinds of neighborhoods, not just dense town centers. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the discussion, Montgomery County is becoming built out and unable to sustain the types of development like detached housing that are not as space efficient or as affordable anymore. While with limited land for new development, communities will have to turn to multifamily alternatives of all shapes and sizes to complement their existing housing stock and allow for a potentially more affordable variety of units. I want to thank you all for coming out today to listen to us discuss these impacts and trends, and look forward to the discussion in the breakout session later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan and Marley. We're going to transition then from a residential building that has its own set of impacts, as we just heard about, to a type of residential construction that is in place to address impacts from other elements. And in this case, energy distribution, climate change, and even going to what we saw unfortunately happen in Texas last year or during the winter. And so today we have John Lesher, a Principal Environmental Planner 2 with MCPC since 2008, leading off this discussion. And joining him, we're fortunate to have Joe Lombardi and Brian Falcon. They are the founders of Alter Eco, a Paoli, PA firm that provides architectural, construction management, and sustainable consulting services to create cost-effective, high-performance homes and small commercial buildings of many styles. They designed and managed the construction of the Bridgeport Zero Energy Ready homes that you're going to hear about today. And these homes actually won a 2020 Montgomery Award given last year for their state-of-the-art energy efficient residential infill development in the borough of Bridgeport. So I want to welcome the three of you, and I'll hand it off to John.
Thank you very much, Scott. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just checking. Thank you very much. And thank everybody for attending our session. As Scott said, we're going to talk about climate change and sustainable housing. Let's see if I can, there we go. Really what I'd like to do today is briefly talk about what decarbonization is, why it's important, and what a municipality can do. And then I'm going to do that very briefly because I think we're all here to listen to our two guest speakers, Joseph Lombardi and Brian Falcon. So what I wanted to do is briefly, what is decarbonization? We had a lot of conversations when we were planning this presentation. We talked to developers, we talked to municipal managers, and we talked to the good people at Green Building United. And one thing that kept coming up was this idea of decarbonization when we're talking about sustainable housing. And we really felt it was an important concept that people should be aware of. Because this really seems to be where residential green building is going, along with just being part of a bigger trend in how we're tackling climate change. So what is decarbonization? Really, we're talking about the goal is to lower emissions with the goal of getting to net zero by switching to clean energy sources. And how are we going to do that? Very simply, because this is a very complicated process, but we only have a couple of minutes to talk about it. We're going to talk about energy efficiency. We're going to talk about preservation. We're going to talk about electrification, and we're going to talk about the issue of equality. So why is this important? Why do we need to talk about decarbonization? Really, it's a response to climate change, and it's a response to the rising energy costs that are associated with climate change. We have homeowners, we have developers who are demanding houses that can handle these conditions, both today and what we're going to see in the future. And we want those houses to be able to handle them from a comfort, from a health, from an economic standpoint. And we want housing that contributes less to the problems that we're facing with climate change. So how do we get there? First step is energy efficiency. The best energy is energy not spent. And Brian and Joe are going to talk about this a lot. How do you do this? How do you create more energy efficient buildings, both with how you design it, how you lay it out, and how you build it? But it's also important talking to, we have a large municipal audience. that energy efficiency is also a big economic driver. It's not something to forget about. It's driving part of this economy. In 2019, of the 100,000 clean energy jobs in Pennsylvania, 75,000 of them were in energy efficiency. So this is a really important concept that we cannot forget about. How do we do it? There are many, many, many national standards, many different programs that you can work with. They all have different requirements, but they all have different benefits and they all have different budgets. So this is something that developers, municipalities should explore and be familiar with. One of the ones that came up that is gaining more and more popularity is the idea of a passive house, which really focuses on the energy efficiency. So this is something that Brian and Joe are experts in, and they'll tell you more about, but it's something that I felt, is something that we should be aware of. Just in the same way, the energy not spent is the best energy. The building that doesn't have to be rebuilt has a much lower carbon footprint. There are many studies out there that show that if we can preserve our existing building stock, we can reduce the environmental impacts, and it also creates more jobs and is an economic driver. So, as we ordinances and governments can start to look at preservation as not only historical, but also as an economic and environmental impact. Electrification. Why do we need to electrify things? Lower carbon emissions, less cost volatility. We have some better efficiency options, and we're also better able to adapt to renewable energy sources, which is where we get into the decarbonization of electricity. How do we get electricity that is less environmentally impactful? We could put it on site. We could put solar panels. We could do geothermal. We can find energy, renewable energy on our sites, but we can also buy renewable energy from state and national energy markets. So we can support those markets as well as we transition towards an electrified home stock. This one is less of a statement and more of a question that I think we all need to deal with. Equitable decarbonization. How do we ensure that every population has access and ability to decarbonize? What was interesting is one of the things that I learned is not only is passive housing and decarbonized homes more efficient, which means lower bills, healthier living environments for those who are living in them, but we're seeing more and more in multifamily housing because there's bonuses in the federal tax credit structure, where if you do passive housing, you makes for a better application and more likelihood of getting funding for it. So we are seeing a growing trend of passive housing and decarbonization in multifamily workforce housing. Well, what can a municipality do to promote decarbonization? A lot of this is building code, some of it's on the developer, but there are things a municipality can do. It comes down, a lot of it, I heard over and over again in our conversations, is the idea of education. Educate your enforcement officials and the developers on what's required and what's possible. Make sure that the elected officials, the staff, the planning commission members are aware of these techniques and technologies, and hopefully they can start to push for developers to incorporate this more and more and be accepting and understanding when something new comes in. And use your municipal websites and social media to educate municipal stakeholders on what can be done to decarbonize their homes and become more efficient. This is a planning commission, so we're going to talk about planning, of course. We can start to encourage decarbonization in the plans that we do, whether it's a comprehensive plan or all the way to our more specialized sustainability, climate action, greenhouse gas emission reduction plans, or energy transition plans. I know a lot of municipalities are working on now. Keep focusing, keep reiterating, make it part of your goals. Once again, as a planning commission, we love our ordinances. There are ordinances that we can craft that can help a community move towards decarbonization. We can include renewable energy ordinances. We can do permitting best practices. We can craft ordinances that promote energy conservation and carbon management. This is something that the Planning Commission would love to help municipalities work with if they want to move forward and implement this. And really, at the end of the day, a municipality can be a leader. Decarbonize your own building, set a good example. When you do something good, publicize it, make sure people are aware. In that same vein, pursue municipal certifications. try to win awards, tiny types of things that would attract developers to say that your community is open and willing for this type of development. And then if you're comfortable, we can always support policy at the federal and state level that would promote and move this type of action forward. So I know that was very brief, but I wanted to give everybody the chance to hear from Brian and Joe, who actually have real world experience applying these concepts. So I am going to gladly hand it over to Brian and Joe from Alter Ego.
Thanks, John. My name is Brian Falcon, and to my left is Joe Lombardi. I'm going to start the presentation with some general overviews of some concepts, and then I'll hand things over to Joe to get into more of the details on the case study itself. Next slide, please. So carbon footprint can be very involved, but in the simplest sense, what we're looking to do when we're trying to reduce our carbon footprint is reduce the energy needed for the building, give the best possible indoor air we can, integrate on-site renewable energy, and reduce the strain on existing infrastructure. Next, please. So the way we approach it from the design side is we look at it as a whole systems approach. So we look to do highly insulated, tight building envelope, high-performing, energy-efficient windows and doors, and the most efficient appliances and systems we can in the building. Then we work with our engineers to right-size the smallest mechanical system we can, and then we integrate an active ventilation system within the building. Next. So one aspect we look at here to break it down is the insulation in our building. And we approach this from a good, better, best scenario. So good being the current energy code, better being the DOE program, and best being the passive house standard. Next. So right in the center of this screen, you'll see many of you are familiar with the insulation requirements. So for climate zone 4 exterior wall assembly, we need an R20 insulation or an R13 plus an R5 continuous. Next slide. So here's an analysis of a project we did locally, where you can see, again, looking at the walls, you're required to have an R20. We had an R29 in our walls, sort of super insulating our assembly. It's about 1.5 times what the code requires. So we also, again, integrated airflow into the building, and also we're prepared to add solar after the building was built. Next slide. Going a bit further to the best approach, you can see here, this is a project in New York, Climate Zone 6A. You can see the requirements for insulation are a bit more robust than here. But again, you can see we are close to an R52 in our walls. That's double what the code requires. And again, we're looking at heat recovery ventilation and very small heating and cooling system required in this building. Next slide. So once we have a super insulated building envelope, we have to start air sealing. The 2015 code requires in this area maximum of 3 air changes of air leakage allowed in climate zone 4. For some reason, the state has amended that regulation to almost double the amount of leakage. We would highly recommend that folks like yourselves uphold that requirement and require tighter buildings. Next. So again, looking at a good, better, best approach, the standard currently is caulk, foam, and seal penetrations and gaps between assemblies. You can go above and beyond that for a better approach to tape those joints and seams as well. Or there's new technology, such as an aero barrier system, which will pressurize the building and fill those cracks and holes in your building with a phase-changing sealant to provide a very, very tight building envelope. Next. So of course, now that we've got a super insulated shell, we need to look at indoor air quality. So of course, what we want to do is minimize the amount of toxic materials in the house. So we want to look at low and no VOC products. And again, it's very important on these insulated type buildings to have an active ventilation system. So we incorporate energy recovery ventilation in this climate zone. And what that does is that provides low volume air, supply air into all your living spaces, such as bedrooms, living rooms, offices, things like that. And it's a balanced exhaust within the building from your dirty spaces, bathrooms, kitchens, mechanical, laundry. Next, please. And of course, the last part of this is we want to look at the most energy efficient fixtures and systems that we can put into the building. Of course, everyone's familiar with Energy Star, water senses for all the plumbing fixtures and water flow. And of course, LED fixtures are commonplace now. Next, please. So now I'll turn things over to Joe to get into some of the details of the Bridgeport project we worked on.
Thanks, Brian. As Brian said, I'm Joe Lombardi. I'm partners with Brian in Alter Eco. The Bridgeport project, we incorporated the DOE Net Zero Ready Home program, and we achieved a HERS rating of 38 on this project, reducing the energy requirement to less than half of what a typical home would use. Next, please. These are two examples. We did two twin home projects in Bridgeport, both utilizing all the principles that Brian had indicated in his presentation portion. We used super insulated envelope, incorporating SIP, structural insulated wall panels, an active recovery ventilation system, high efficiency triple insulated, triple glazed windows, and low and no VOC materials. Next, please. Starting from the foundation, we utilized a prefabricated insulated concrete foundation system, which comes to the site in large components, already insulated, gets put in place in less than a day with very little on-site waste, and is ready for framing as soon as the panels are erected. Next, please. Structural insulated wall and roof panels were used. These are prefabricated wall system that is comes with window and door openings already incorporated, structurally integrated components as well. And once again, is once it's erected, you have a fully insulated envelope ready for finishes. Next, please. This just shows the one of the buildings in the fully erected SIP system. Window openings already in place, door and window headers, and roof panels. Next, please. We incorporated a high performance building wrap as well. This is a SIGA product, which is a more robust product that comes in large rolls with very few seams once they're taped. Next, please. The internal components of the building, as Brian indicated, are very important. On the left, we have a heat pump water heater and the manifold hot and cold water system. Each plumbing fixture has a direct home run hot and cold line, and the hot water piping has to be sized such that there's only a half gallon of water in the pipe from the manifold to the fixture, so you're not wasting hot water when you turn the faucet on. The center photograph is a high-performance ducted mini-split system, hyperheat unit that's high efficiency. It comes in several different forms. This is a vertical unit. They come in a pancake unit that's about 3 feet square by 8 inches tall that we used in other parts of the home. And then you can do what people are typically used to seeing, the wall-mounted system. On the right is the ERV energy ventilation system. The unit draws in fresh air from the outside into this unit, goes through HEPA filters, then is brought into a manifold that distributes the fresh air throughout the house. Then each of the kitchen, bathrooms, and laundry and mechanical spaces are exhausted through the system as well, and then that air is directed to the outside through a independent duct system. Next, please. So an energy efficient, sustainable home can look like any other home. It has all, you can have all the features and amenities that people are looking for, only you do it in a home that uses far less energy and is much more comfortable from an inside air quality standpoint. Next, please. Utilizing the SIP roof system, you're able to get cathedral rooms that are highly insulated with very little heat gain through these roof systems. Bathrooms can utilize luxury fixtures. They're all WaterSense certified and giving people the kind of amenities they're looking for in any home. Next, please. I'll hand it over to Brian to go through some other recommendations.
So it's been a little bit of a high-speed presentation here, but just to recap, again, we're looking at super tight, super insulated envelopes, right-sized mechanical systems to minimize energy needs, minimize air leakage, and we get third-party certification for the air tightness and the duct leakage. Again, looking for water conservation in our fixtures, energy conservation in all the appliances in the building, and looking at certain incentives to get builders and folks to be doing these. There are tax credits, there's financial incentives available to offset some of the premiums to do the HERS ratings. One thing that can be done that some municipalities are doing is they're creating a performance labeling program in their towns. There's also some zoning that's being implemented in different areas. One of the biggest things we see is from architects' side is there's a big variant in which municipalities uphold and don't uphold the energy code. So we, of course, are striving to get everyone on board and enforce the air tightness requirements for buildings. To us, it's a no-brainer to enforce what the requirements are. So hand things back over to John now.
Thank you, Brian and Joe. This was an excellent example. I'm excited for the questions. Hopefully we've gotten a bunch of questions. We'll be available for the Q&A. And hopefully, even though we went very quickly, this was enough to excite you about the idea and the prospects, and to research some more and see how we can implement these types of projects throughout the county. So thank you very much, and I look forward to talking with you guys in the breakout group.
All right, thank you, John, Joe, and Brian. Very interesting presentation. Certainly would love to see more of that happening throughout our county. Our next two sessions really spin off of two of the most dominant storylines that came out of 2020, the unprecedented shutdown of our commercial centers due to the pandemic, and the outpouring of protests and awareness for racial injustice and the need for greater social equity and inclusion stemming from the tragedy of the George Floyd murder in the summer of 2020. Our next presenters will talk about our responsibility to foster greater recognition of unheard voices and how one comprehensive planning effort in Montgomery County sought to do just that in a groundbreaking fashion that can provide an example for all of our municipalities. I want to introduce Mike Narkowicz, our Community Planning Assistant Manager with MCPC since 2003, and one of the planners who worked on the Lansdale Plan. And he's joined by Kristen DeDominic. Kristen is currently the coordinator of the Bucksmont Collaborative, a nonprofit membership organization that produces results-oriented impacts in health and human service issues. And she also served on the Lansdale 2040 Diversity Committee. And until 2020, Kristen was the former program director for Manna on Main Street in Lansdale. So I'll hand it over to you, Mike, if you have your presentation ready to share.
Yep. Bear with me.
If you could hit Control L, Mike, that'll bring it full screen.
Yeah, hold on one second. I'm just trying to get it to work here. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Can you see it now?
Yeah. Can you hit Control L?
Yeah. Sure. Okay. All right. So, as Scott mentioned, this is Lansdale 2040. And let me just go. This is how comprehensive plans can address social equity, and we're focusing today on Lansdale 2040, which was adopted just under a year ago. And I'd like to begin with the definition of equity from APA's Planning for Equity Policy Guide. It's just and fair inclusion into a society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential, unlocking the promise of the nation by unleashing the promise in us all. And today's presentation is divided into 4 parts. So in this section, in the introduction, I'll talk about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, in the Lansdale 2040 Planning Initiative. And I will briefly touch on demographic trends in Montgomery County and equity initiatives in the county. I will talk about how the AICP Code of Ethics provides a foundation for social equity in planning. And then Kristen Dominic is going to talk about the Diversity Committee. And I will finish up by talking about the Diversity and Inclusion chapter. So as I said, Lansdale 2040 is the first comprehensive plan in Montgomery County to include a Diversity and Inclusion chapter. The formation of Lansdale 2040's Diversity Committee occurred shortly before the creation of the borough's Human Relations Committee. And together, these events underscored the increasing importance being placed on diversity, equity, and inclusion in Lansdale in recent years. In the vision chapter of the plan, it says that Lansdale will ensure that its programs, policies, and communications serve everyone in the borough, and that it will consider efforts to reach everyone in the borough when drafting, designing, communicating, and implementing policy changes. Diversity is one of 5 guiding principles in the plan, and as a principle, it relates to and supports the other principles. For example, sense of place and vibrancy. Planning has tremendous opportunity to create positive change, and that's all the more important when we think about how some planning has contributed to inequity. So we can think of slum clearance and interstate highway constructions through minority and less affluent neighborhoods, exclusionary zoning, gentrification, which is displaced populations, often minority and less affluent, locally undesirable land uses or LULUs being cited among vulnerable populations. And of course, regionally in Philadelphia and West Philadelphia, one example is the former Black Bottom neighborhood, which was predominantly African-American, got pushed out by the construction of things like the University City Science Center in University City generally. So incorporating diversity, equity, and inclusion creates a better comprehensive plan. It makes it more representative of the community, gives it greater legitimacy, it better serves the community's needs, and it has community buy-in. So it's not a plan by others for others. And it promotes more communication and understanding in the community. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the AICP Code of Ethics and how that provides a foundation for social equity in planning. The Code of the American Institute of Certified Planners, or AICP, talks about our overall responsibility to the public as planners. And it mentions how public participation in planning processes should be broad enough to include those who lack formal organization or influence. And we need to place a special responsibility. We have a special responsibility, rather, to plan for the needs of the disadvantaged and to promote racial and economic integration. And also we've responsibility to deal fairly with all participants in the planning process. And we also need to increase opportunities for members of underrepresented groups to become professional planners and help them advance in the profession. MCPC has placed renewed emphasis upon public outreach and participation in the last decade. This has involved increased outreach and the employment of creative techniques and technology for doing so. Now I'm going to briefly touch upon a demographic profile of the county and its equity initiatives. Montgomery County has become more diverse in the past decade, with especially dramatic growth among Latinos, who grew by 39%, Asians, whose numbers grew by 18%, and the African American population, whose numbers grew by 8%. And now I'll talk about MCPC equity initiatives. This first slide is MCPC initiatives. I'll follow it up with initiatives the county overall has undertaken. The MCPC has expanded outreach to diversify recruiting and the resulting workforce. Dan Farina, who you heard from earlier, is co-chair of the Montgomery County Diversity Committee. MCPC developed a trail access, diversity, and awareness plan, which makes recommendations in signage and connectivity, gateway and trailhead improvements, corridor improvements, public art, programming and events, and marketing and communications. And Restart Montco, formed during the pandemic, provided resources about affordable housing and nonprofit organization support, which were critical issues during the pandemic and still are. The county overall formed the diversity committee to ensure that the county lives up to its social equity ideals. They conducted a diversity survey of the full county workforce. They recommended the creation of a DEI plan and the monitoring of progress. And they recommended the hiring of a director of a DEI, and that's underway now. That director will have many responsibilities, and a couple of the interesting ones are incorporating DEI into recruitment, retention, and education, and building a culture of inclusion throughout county administration, senior leadership, constituents, service providers, and community partners. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kristen Dominic to talk about the Lansdale 2040 Diversity Committee.
Thanks so much. Mike, can you advance to the next slide? Thank you so much. So how did diversity get started? We were brought to the table as volunteers to think about Lansdale 2040. And very quickly, when we looked around the table, while there was diversity there, we realized that there wasn't racial diversity. And even as volunteers, we had been given a fair amount of decision-making, power and authority. And so we wanted to be intentional that it wasn't just, our voices at the table that would be heard, but that we would be thoughtful about how we are centering kind of the voices of all in our community and the needs, ideas, and and vision of our residents of throughout the community and people of color. And so we brought this up to the Lansdale planning team. And we are so thankful that they quickly responded and said, yes, let's form a diversity committee and let's think about how we can be very intentional about including kind of all voices in the community to be part of this plan. And so just a big kind of shout out and thanks to particularly John Ernst who gave that go ahead and really championed the diversity committee. And of course to Connie and Rachel, who also served on that committee as well. So next slide, yeah. So how did we do this? We had kind of three kind of core goals as a diversity committee. One, we wanted to be intentional about diversifying the planning committee. We sought to have our community engagement efforts be as inclusive as possible. And we wanted the 2040 plans to include a chapter that celebrates Lansdale's diversity and encourages the current and kind of future leadership to apply an inclusive lens and an equitable framework to their decision-making moving forward. And so, yeah, Mike, you're welcome to go to the next slide. Thank you. So we kind of started with a couple of core tools that many of us use as we think about kind of engagement. One is we sent out a survey to all of the households in the borough with an electric bill. And then we thought about how do we use this tool a little bit, deep in the use of the tool to reach more. So we created an online and print version. We had the survey translated as well into Spanish, as Mike referenced. We have a growing kind of Latinx population. And we were trying to get creative about how do we get this tool to kind of populations that are often underrepresented, whose voices aren't always included. So an example that was, a creative example of this is that we reached out to, an ESL class that's being hosted in Lansdale and gave them the English copy of the survey and said, hey, let's do this as a project so you can be practicing the English while contributing to kind of the narrative of Lansdale 2040. Right, so there's different ways to kind of think about this. We also reached out to kind of the mosque. We reached out to the LGBTQ community through some creative means. Mike, next slide, because I know there's a few more referenced as well. Mike, can you go to the next slide, please? Oh, you're muted. Oh, are you there? Oh, there we go. You are there. Thank you so much. Thank you. And we also were intentional about trying to reach various businesses, community, and kind of faith leaders. A couple of things to mention. We also went to kind of those third spaces in the community where people gather and you have more opportunity to kind of reach a diverse audience. And so we reached out to our, our local library that was very receptive to sharing the surveys, to hanging up the flyers, and to helping work with us, as well as North Penn Commons. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, so I'll just kind of briefly mention it there. And then we, of course, thought about some different modalities like, website, social media. So trying kind of different avenues to engage. Okay. Thanks, Mike. Next slide, please. So another tactic that we use that many of you probably use is kind of going to where people are, right? So meeting people where they're at. And we did that by three kind of core events. So one is that we went to the Founders Day and volunteers had a table at the art market, and you can see kind of a couple of engagement strategies there, voting by dot, as well as kind of sharing ideas and kind of comment through Post-its. To the International Spring Fest, which is an incredible signature event that happens in Lansdale that celebrates the diversity of the community. And then at North Penn Commons. And I'm pausing here for just a moment to just kind of acknowledge, why it's important to kind of reach out to a campus like North Penn Commons. So, as shared at the time, I was the program director at Mana on Main Street when this plan was being put together. And North Penn Commons hosts Mana on Main Street, the Peak Senior Center, Advanced Living Communities, and the North Penn YMCA. And why it's important to come to a campus like the North Penn Commons is that it provides an intentional kind of approach to reaching out to communities that are not often served. So particularly at Mana, having kind of, which serves, it's an emergency food provider serving the North Penn region and serving primarily low-income communities. It provides a space to very kind of authentically to engage that community and make sure that individuals are heard, regardless of class, race, gender, kind of whatever this looks like, that there's a space to be heard. And we did this by having Mana kind of cater through its workforce development program food, so that it created this really welcoming and warm space for individuals to come and to share their opinion. And it's also important to have kind of your volunteers who are on that committee have those relationships in the community, so that there is already that trust and that relationship built, so people will come out to share that voice. So coming out to North Penn Commons not only allowed us to reach individuals from various kind of communities, but also to be thoughtful about reaching out to seniors as well. So the Peak Senior Center was there, and Advanced Living Communities has residential space where individuals, primarily low-income seniors, live. So it was a great engagement strategy. So Mike, next slide, please. Thank you. Thank you. And of course, we wanted to be intentional about the task force. So who's at the planning table, and making sure that we had different kind of, identities there. So diversity. So you'll see that we had representatives from, the youth community, environmental groups, developers, our public school system, from the chambers of commerce. And of course, we created this diversity committee with the goal that, it wouldn't be just about this kind of planning process, but that it would be kind of embedded in the diversity chapter, so that the work moving forward really had that lens. So I think, Mike, I'll hand it back over to you to talk about that diversity chapter. Thanks. Oh, nope, I have one more slide. Thank you. So I wanted to just briefly mention, and we can talk more about this in the breakout group discussions if people have an interest in this, but there are a few tools that we're using at the Bucksmont Collaborative now that really think about kind of how we center kind of community voice and engage authentically around just whatever topic that you're looking at, how to kind of do this a little bit differently. And so I really recommend folks to look at a tool called the Spectrum of Community Engagement to Ownership by an organization called Facilitating Power, that allows us to think about going from a process of engagement that, whether intentional or unintentional, marginalizes to this kind of approach where you're really kind of collaborating and then ultimately kind of deferring to community decision making. And so it's a great tool that provides some clear roadmaps for that. And then I'll just briefly mention the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. They have a wonderful set of tools around kind of how you operationalize equity within kind of government systems, as well as there's just a wealth of tools from a group called the Building Movement Project. So I encourage you to go to those sites, review the tools, and of course we can talk more in the breakout groups if valuable. So Mike, now it's back to you. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Kristen. That was great. So now I will talk about the Diversity and Inclusion chapter of Lansdale 2040. When we wrote the chapter, in the first section, we analyzed the diversity of the borough itself. And some of this was based on data. We looked at the diversity index of the borough, and the more diverse portions were congregated around the main commercial mixed use corridors, such as West Main Street, South Broad Street, near the rail stations, and also in the northern part of the borough, near the industrial area. We looked at languages spoken at home. This also represents the diversity of the borough. Now, this particular data is from the North Penn School District, but Lansdale is one of the most diverse areas in the North Penn School District. And I think it's interesting to point out that of this wheel here, 40% represent languages from Bangladesh or India. So you have 21% spoke Bangla from Bangladesh. You had 12% who spoke Gujarati from India, and then you had 7% who spoke other Indian dialects. Korean was also one of the more spoken languages. We looked at demographic change, and as you look at two different points in time, the last two censuses available for analysis, or not the last two, but a 20-year period from 1990 to 2010, you can see that the Asian population grew dramatically from less than 4% of the borough's population to more than 13%. The African-American population grew from only 0.6% to nearly 6%. And then if you look at the table below, in the major Asian ethnicities present in the borough in the 2010 census, you see again the importance of the Indian and Bangladeshi community to the borough. And you can see evidence around the borough, from fashion to the grocery stores, such as multiple Bangladeshi grocery stores selling halal meat, and multiple mosques that have sprung up as well. It really does add to the richness of the culture. So as we looked at the chapter served as an educational component, not only for the end user of the plan, the reader of the finished document, but also for the Lansdale 2040 task force when writing the chapter, and often guided by the diversity committee. One of the most important points is that there's numerous facets of diversity to consider. And so everyone needs to consider that, plan writers, plan readers, as represented on the top slide. So it's racial diversity, it's age diversity, disability status, gender identity, and so many other things. The task force acknowledged the low levels of internet access amongst some populations, which was important for a strategy for public outreach. We strategized accordingly. As you see in the bar chart, there are many groups such as the Latino population, those 65 and older, and those in certain education and income groups that did not have access to an internet or computer at the time of the 2010 census. So that's why we did things such as hold live events, and we sent notices about the survey to every household in the borough with the electric bill. And we distributed the survey at distribution centers so that people could get hard copies rather than rely too much on the internet. So this chapter also is a foundation for a future potential diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, which is one of the recommendations of the chapter. The recommendations of the diversity and inclusion chapter included the priority 1, or the highest recommendations, and this included create a standing diversity and inclusion task force. So the diversity committee was formed for the purpose of working on the diversity and inclusion chapter and informing and strategizing the public outreach process for Lansdale 2040. But this recommendation would make it a permanent task force to serve as an advisor to the governing body and steward diversity and inclusion generally in the borough, identifying areas of concern, and also helping make the borough's appointed bodies more diverse. Priority 2, which are important recommendations, include using diversity to strengthen the image and identity of the borough, striving to recruit diverse candidates for borough jobs, assessing how the borough's policies, programs, and procedures impact equity, and when conducting public outreach and when updating communication strategies, striving to include communications networks used by all people in Lansdale. And so outreach can be enhanced by communicating with leaders of different community groups. We recognize in the chapter that it's important to identify bridges to certain groups, community leaders, be they civic, cultural, recreational, religious, or what have you. Also, priority 2 recommendations included creating a diversity and inclusion plan. One of the things the diversity committee looked at as we're working on the chapter was the diversity and equity strategic plan of Eugene, Oregon. This was a good example and included many recommendations, but some of the more interesting ones included proposals for training staff in cultural and diversity issues and public outreach techniques, the attainment of diversity of awards for national and regional organizations. And as part of the public outreach recommendations, they also recommended creating a best practices manual and a guide for advice on public outreach for the city government generally. So takeaways from this presentation: planners and municipal officials have a tremendous opportunity to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion through municipal, and I should add, or county, regional, or other comprehensive plans. The AICP Code of Ethics underscores the great responsibility planners have to ensure broad participation, to plan fairly, including with and for underrepresented groups, to plan for the disadvantaged, and to promote racial and economic integration. There are a variety of methods and techniques available to reach people. So planners need to be creative, resourceful, and relentless with their public outreach. And there are numerous resources, plans, and toolkits to draw upon to promote DEI in your community and in your plan. And again, that will be presented as part of the resources slide at the end of all the presentations. Lastly, I just want to encourage planners and municipal officials to elevate DEI planning as a major component of your planning efforts. You may well find that the experience and products that result help expand dialogue and understanding, resulting in a stronger community and a planning product that is more representative of the people and their aspirations. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to talking to you in the breakout room.
Thank you, Mike and Kristen. That was great. And we've talked about inclusion and diversity in our planning efforts and getting input. That's kind of always been talked about, but to varying levels of success and always trying to increase it. But the extent to which Lansdale went and looked at their governance and their community going forward, and as implementation of the plan, and the whole dedicating the chapter itself to the issue, is really something I haven't seen certainly around here in any other plan, and is exciting to kind of lay the groundwork of how it should be done. So thank you for bringing that to us. So we're going to move on to our final presentation, and here we're going to take the mini session concept probably one step further and see how many extra mini sessions we can fit into one session. So this is going to be a quick hitting overview of ideas and issues facing our commercial centers. I think we saw during the pandemic, gratefully, the tremendous amount of resiliency in our business community, more than I think most people would have imagined, and we're very proud of that. But at the same time, there was a cost. Not every business could hold on, and the resultant fact is not only the loss of business, but the vacant storefronts and buildings where some of them once prospered. So we wanted to assemble this to provide some recommendations to both support the businesses that made it through and are in the recovery mode, as well as give communities some tools to make the best with what they have and recover as a commercial district at the same time. So if you could go to the next slide. That's the wrong slide. Next slide.
I don't know what's wrong.
We have a series of 5 topics, and you're going to hear from Patty Guttenplant, our Assistant Director of Design and Outreach for MCPC, Matt Popek, the Transportation Planning Assistant Manager, Claire Warner, Community Planner 2, myself, and we're also fortunate to have Dave Zellers, our Director of the Commerce Department for Montgomery County, who's going to tie it all up at the end here. So I'll hand over to Patty if you're ready.
Thanks, Scott. Yes, so I am going to jump right into the first item that we've talked about, which is encourage placemaking in outdoor spaces. So during the pandemic last year, as Mike mentioned, we launched a Restart Montco. And Restart Montco, which we covered under 6 topics, was an initiative to assist our communities during the pandemic by suggesting ways maybe in which outdoor spaces could be utilized, whether that be our trails, our downtowns along the streets and sidewalks, or our commercial areas in more traditional shopping centers. In one of the topics, we suggested outdoor dining could be a way for restaurants to stay open by using their outdoor spaces while also promoting placemaking. And we did design illustrations to assist potential users to know how to implement these ideas. So as part of that Restart Montco, we provide those resources such as links to articles, shared ideas that we got from our other communities. We provided design solutions, and we created a public forum. And one of these resources was an article from the Project for Public Spaces, A Street to Go To, Not Just Through, Principles for Fostering Streets as Places. So in this, they talked about there being principles, they had 8 principles that help streets to become destinations. And we felt that these could also be used to determine how other spaces that aren't streets necessarily can also be destinations. So one of the first ones is great activities and destinations and activities. So Power of the 10 concept was talked about here, where great places have at least 10 things to do in them, things that create a buzz of activity. Places also then need to be safe, inviting, and rich in detail. People need to feel safe when they're going there, but they also are attracted to streetscapes and building and landscaping that have focal points or public art. The design should be for lingering and social interaction. So you want the places to have staying options, a combination of restaurants, galleries, maybe small shops for browsing and shopping, and public spaces just to maybe sit and stop, but also where there can be conversations and communication with other people. And spaces need to be unique, accessible, and flexible. And so when we think of accessible, we think of the universal design. They need to be flexible so they can be used differently in different times. So this year, we also then had to think about what characteristics brought people and kept them downtown during a pandemic. And DVRPC recently shared a report named Retail Districts of Greater Philadelphia Using Location Analytics to Plan for Post-Pandemic Economic Recovery. And there's a link to that in our last slide. In that, they identified characteristics that they found that reduced the pandemic's impact and those that exacerbated the pandemic's impact. And we're going to emphasize the ones that reduced the impact. And these are the 5 you see on the screen. So development, recent mixed use and residential retail that was done more recently seemed to be more resilient. Diversity. Downtowns with a diverse environment, with a diversity in demographics, a mix of uses, and transportation options were more resilient. People living near the retail and those downtown areas were more apt to shop there and help those retail places stay open. Trails. In Montgomery County alone, we saw our trail use jump, and in 1 month last summer, it jumped 200%. So trails were very popular. And then walkability. Pedestrian-friendly areas are just more resilient. So what would then be the takeaways on this? So the idea of the takeaways are, this is not a time to forget placemaking. Open spaces have become more important to people, and those that are most successful are the ones that are most engaging. So placemaking is that idea of building a community around a sense of place, and safety and activity, and that where people are. And streetscaping and placemaking contribute to a place's walkability and its comfort, its sense of place, and its sense of safety. We also observed a trend towards some of the shopping centers now creating that main street. We saw it in some of the previous slides on multifamily, that main street or village squares, and with a renewed focus on pedestrian space and creating unique experiences that welcome shoppers. Another takeaway is that towns that have more room for like outdoor dining with either wide sidewalks or the ordinances in places that allow you maybe to convert parking lots and that were comfortable outdoor spaces with trees and other forms of shade, were more able to pivot to outdoor dining and sales and more quickly and could be more flexible to adapt to the societal change and the economic conditions. People are looking for that safe outdoor experience. So commercial spaces and main streets that had that strong outdoor component were also attractive places during the pandemic and emerging from the pandemic. And people crave that in-person interaction and the experiences of shopping and dining both. So even in the environment of online shopping and delivery, the places that allow for people to interact and combine those things as activities together were more successful. And then lastly, the shopping experience paired with entertainment in unique settings are more likely to survive and be more resilient. They're attracted to shop a different type of shopper or to a more diverse set of shoppers. So in one case here, sometimes it's like even some malls, like Plymouth Meeting Mall, has focused on that family friendly and building that retailtainment niche, and which is for dining and entertainment together. So those places that offer this diversity in activities also find themselves to be more resilient. I'm going to pass it now off to Matt Popek.
Thank you, Patty. Go to the next slide. Business owners across Montgomery County are facing an evolution of the perennial challenge of attracting customers to utilize their services and buy their goods. Thanks to the pandemic, we as consumers have all demanded changes in the way we interact with retailers. And while some of the changes in methods may have started for health and safety reasons, we expect many of these changes to persist as a matter of increasing customer convenience. One of the feature documents that the MCPC published as part of our Restart Monco efforts last year was on customer convenience. And I want to take a couple of minutes today to remind everyone of the principles discussed and how they may persist beyond the pandemic. Large-scale retail trends, such as increased online shopping and desired flexibility in picking up orders, were growing even before last year. Customers have shown that they want to spend the time on their own schedule to purchase goods away from retailers' physical locations, while they also want the retailer to be responsive and provide clear and easy methods for pickup or curbside delivery. We have broadly recognized two distinct categories when it comes to discussing treatments for parking spaces and curbside pickup: spaces on private property, such as in shopping centers, and spaces in the public right-of-way on various streets. As you see the examples on the screen here, retailers have developed many different ways to both allow customers to park for pickup and to attract attention from potential future customers, with some choosing to go as far as installing permanent pavement markings. We at the MCPC recommend a few different tips for business owners looking to install or upgrade curbside pickup spaces on their private properties. First, examine your parking lot layout and determine the best locations to designate pickup spaces, both for customer convenience and for employee accessibility if the business will continue to offer contactless delivery of goods. These spaces should be clearly identified and sensibly connected to building entrances as well as entrance and exit driveways. If a shopping center wants to host shared pickup spaces between multiple stores, it should take the time to consult with each business about their expected demand to determine where and how many spaces should be set aside, and whether users such as food delivery services are permitted to use them. Once drivers are in a parking stall, the business or shopping center should provide clear instructions for contacting the business if they are requesting their goods be brought directly to their vehicle. Clear and attractive signage helps to elevate the overall customer experience and may help to encourage return visits. If customers are expected to come into the store to pick up pre-purchased goods, a reminder that spaces are for short stays on the parking stall sign may be appropriate. Next slide. True curbside pickup situations on public roadways may require consultation and coordination with the local municipality to ensure that customers are able to access their purchases without disrupting normal parking patterns. Businesses should work with the municipality and the roadway owner, which in certain cases may be PennDOT, to set aside certain stretches of roadways for loading and unloading, which are becoming more popular as delivery vans and ride-sharing vehicles compete for otherwise crowded curb space. In downtown areas where parking meters are utilized, it is possible with newer equipment to offer free short-term parking before a customer needs to pay for a longer stay. It is important for municipalities to make sure that any places along a curb that are reserved are properly established and compatible with any ADA regulations or fire codes for emergency vehicle access. Weighing all of these concerns together may feel a bit overwhelming, but we certainly view the time working out the issues as well spent, as we expect consumers to continue to demand flexibility in their future shopping patterns. Next, I will turn it over to our director, Scott France, to talk about new commercial use zoning.
Thanks, Matt. So one strategy, a fairly obvious one, to address and limit the impact of vacant storefronts or buildings in a commercial center is to expand the universe of potential uses that could go into these sites. We still want these uses to fit into commercial activity and be a contributing part of it. But a lot of these types of uses really do fit that bill. And like a lot of the quote unquote sudden impacts from the pandemic, this was a strategy actually at the front of our planning minds well before COVID hit. Some of you may have actually joined us back in 2018 for a Planning Smarter event on the future of manufacturing in Montco. And at that event, and again today, I want to take the opportunity to encourage municipalities to consider the value that small scale manufacturing, maker spaces, and artisanal production and retail can bring to a downtown or shopping center. Some of these uses are now very, very much appropriate in retail locations and provides a new opportunity. The technology has changed, and there's a whole class of services now that our zoning codes don't always keep up with and make both enabling and also encouraged. So many can and do include a retail component in these activities, and that can create an experiential situation, which we've heard so much about as being the future of retail and what can help buoy a retail environment despite the changing of trends and the impact of online purchasing. So in addition to the worthwhile goal of staving off vacancies, there are also some other benefits to these types of uses. There's often a strong element of entrepreneurism in these efforts. Today's creative risk takers can find success and blossom out, which can result in new anchors and larger spaces of economic activity. I personally live in Ardmore, and we had a startup brewery come in about a decade ago to what was a very small place. And within a number of years, their business just took off, and they opened a second location just a block or two away at almost 10 times the square footage, and are still there today. So seeing that happen, seeing them become an anchor in the community is often something that we can find from this type of business and this type of activity. It's also encouraging to see how some of these types of businesses encompass a strong creative element, and that in turn results in more minority and female-led enterprises being created at a greater rate than what we might see in the general business startups overall. So that's another encouraging aspect. Next slide. We have two examples I wanted to point to real quick here in Montgomery County. Schwenksville has really done some amazing things in its commercial center. If you haven't been there in a while, please check it out. In the last few years, they've created an amazing anchor for their public space, enhanced their community park, and a new borough hall has been installed, along with great integration with the Perkiomen Trail. And so now the stage is set for revitalization, redevelopment of some commercial properties. One you can see here in the lower left on your screen, a former bank building, the Univest Bank, which is no longer there. And they're going through the process now of finding a suitable occupant. At the same time, they're putting through a zoning amendment, which is in process right now, that will expand and allow for new uses along the lines of artisanal manufacturing, as well as brew pub or a brewery type activity, which is probably a very good use for this particular site that we're looking at. So in addition, they address parking needs and provide some flexibility and some new provisions that allow for on-street parking to substitute. And they're really looking at ways to expand the opportunity to put it into by right uses in their V2 Village Commercial District is another strategy. So we are excited to see what they're doing there and see them going in the right direction to try to transform, in their case, a village downtown. And then the other example to the right is kind of the flip side of that. And when we're talking about commercial quarters, this is a former industrial area, Ambler Yards in Lower Gwinnett Township, just outside Ambler Borough. They updated their zoning to provide new uses in an industrial district and now have embraced the ability for a coffee shop, for eateries, for creative office spaces, as well as still facilitating warehousing and some light manufacturing as well. And there's a great 3D printing operation right next to some office setups and some co-working space as well. So again, it demonstrates that creativity and the municipality willing to look at their codes and be more flexible and not just rely on what we too much do with tradition, and figure out what helps businesses today. So with that, I'll pass it on to Claire.
Thanks, Scott. This section addresses creative strategies to temporarily use vacant storefronts. Activating storefronts energizes the street and attracts people, which benefits downtowns, neighboring businesses, and the general community. Integrating pop-ups has been gaining popularity in recent years and is one way to help temporarily fill vacant storefronts while allowing new businesses to test their product or service within the local market. Beyond selling products, retail stores serve multiple purposes for a community, bringing experiences, contributing character, and creating third places for people to gather. When a small amount of vacancy presents opportunities, pop-ups can be used to experiment with new retail formats, host events, or initiate change in the retail mix of the district. Municipalities can help encourage pop-ups in a few ways. They can permit temporary leases and can create a municipal pop-up program. A municipality can also identify potential sites and host pop-up events, which can be a way to demonstrate the benefits of pop-ups to the local economy. Next. Another way to activate vacant storefronts is through interactive window displays. Highlighted on this slide are 3 case studies of programs that work to activate storefront windows. The takeaway from these 3 case studies are to partner with local artists, track vacancies and changes over time, and make interactive window displays required by law. The first is Windows of Opportunity in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, shown in the left picture. The downtown bid drives the collaborative projects between artists, businesses, and community leaders to create eye-catching window displays. The next case study is the Cambridge Storefront Initiative, which is a creative design contest that aims to energize neighborhoods and activate commercial districts by filling empty storefront windows with locally made art. The Cambridge Community Development Department, which is the planning agency for the city of Cambridge, has a story map of the vacant storefront database, which is that middle image. Another case study is from Southampton, New York. In response to high vacancy rates, Southampton enacted a law amending village code to require vacant storefronts in the shopping district to put up visually interesting window displays. The window displays must be approved by the village administrator unless landlords partner with local artists organizations. Local artists supply their work at no cost while showcasing and potentially selling their art to window shoppers. Next. This final case study features Culture House, a nonprofit organization that transforms unused spaces into vibrant third places by allowing property owners to make temporary space for people to socialize, create, and learn. The Culture House team has created a manual and shares kits and information for locations elsewhere that are interested in creating temporary community space. Next, I'll pass this over to Dave Zellers.
Good evening, everybody. This is really a great time to be having this conversation. There's a tremendous amount of energy, and all the things that were just talked about. It is really a moment where we need to bring all these things together. So first and foremost, for myself, my team, I'm sure Scott and his team need to agree. We're an email, a phone call away to come out, work with our communities, and talk about any of these issues in greater detail, because we really want to do that. Over the past year, we've invested resources into supporting the Make It Main Street initiative to spread the word about local shopping, local events. There's a big push right now for the Crave Montco month here in July coming up. But we need our communities. We need you to really pull together. We want to work with you, give you all the ideas and support, like what you've heard today. Activate our spaces. Let's get people outside. People are craving those experiences, right? They want to engage again. We see it all the time. And be creative in that process. Embrace something new, something you haven't done before. I'll give you one little tip right now from my past experience. People love any event where they can bring their pet, whether it's their dog or their cat or they got a snake or whatever. Get them out there. Make it part of the community. Make it part of an event. People love doing that. And also, it's a good time as we look ahead to the future. How are we managing our commercial corridors? Who's in charge of these things? Is there an organization already in the community, or are there organizations that need to be brought together? And how are those things going to move forward? It's a conversation. It's not always an easy conversation to navigate. Again, we can help with that, provide guidance and ideas, talk about different methods, but it is a timely conversation as we look ahead after what we've been through, and also to embrace the possibility of change and all the new things to come, and all the things we have to think through. Can we go to that next slide? Let's hit that up. Just a couple of things, again, from my experience. As some of you know me, know my last job, I worked all over the Commonwealth with communities on local and downtown development. If you don't know your banks in your community and what they're interested in through their Community Reinvestment Act, or just the kind of things they can support, get to know them, understand what they're thinking about, understand how they see the business environment in the community and what they're thinking about with their clients as they work through things. Can't stress enough, develop a plan, refine the plan too. Don't let it sit on the shelf. Make it live, make it breathe. One of the biggest things right now, I think one of the biggest lessons we as a county have learned over the last year, and thankfully we have a new communications director who's helped us really elevate our approach in terms of social media use. Think about who you're trying to contact with social media, how you're trying to communicate with them. Different groups, different audiences, they're looking at different things right now. So we certainly encourage you to learn more about your social. Don't just rely on Facebook as sort of the disclaimer to that. There's a lot of different platforms out there. And most importantly, and again, all these things that everybody else covered in this presentation today, all these great ideas, our commercial corridors, our main streets, they're places for everybody. Make sure that they're welcoming, they're vibrant, make sure that they are inclusive, and that, as you're thinking about your goals in the future, does everything really bind together in your community along those corridors and in those places, so that, again, as we emerge from what we've been through and as we look to build a more vibrant economy, and really, most importantly, a more vibrant civic life with different folks, that our downtowns are best positioned to do that. So I'm happy. I know we're going to do some breakouts here. I look forward to talking to folks more. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. And thank everyone on this last session. I learned something I didn't expect, and that's if Dave is invited with his pets, I'm going to be a little wary that the snake may show up. So that's good to know. So now we have a number of resources. Patty, if you want to just file through those. Don't get out your pen or start scurrying these down. This is all going to be posted on our website. You can access anything you want from here. Just wanted to let you know what was available. And then also I want to provide the contact info. If you heard anything, someone talk about anything today and want to follow up, we're all happy to respond and to talk to you further about any of these issues. And as Dave said, that's why we're here. And then finally, a big thanks, a shout out to our county commissioners who enable these events to happen and support our efforts, as well as our Planning Commission board. We have a few of them here today. We want to recognize Stephen Klein, our chair, and Dulcie Flaherty, our vice chair, and John Ernst, who didn't get enough credit, I don't think, but as part of that land sale effort, He is the manager of Lansdale. So again, thanks to all of our board for their support and participating in this. And then finally, we are ready to move into the breakout rooms for any questions that you want to ask of the panels. We're going to take 10 minutes on each side. So for the first session, we're going to have topics A and B, which were, just to remind you, that the first one was the multifamily impacts, and the second was the climate change and decarbonization of residential units. So I believe that's A and B respectively. So when you go to, I'm going to share my screen here. And when you go to or look down on your Zoom client, you will see this in the bottom right, breakout rooms. If you click on that, you'll get a notice to select one of the 2 rooms to join. While you're in those rooms, you can go back and forth. If you want to check out the other topic going on, feel free. We won't be offended. Just jump in and out as you wish. After 10 minutes, we'll all come back here, and then we'll go into the second breakout session. All right. Go right ahead.
Hello, everyone. Looks like we still have about 15 people who have not joined a breakout room yet. So if you want to participate in the Q&A for either topics A or topic B, topic A being the multifamily revolution, topic B being climate change and sustainable housing, those breakout rooms are open now. And again, I'm here to help anyone who has trouble going to those rooms. So speak up. I'll help you. I see John.
Matt, I cannot get into it. I don't have that option in my Zoom to enter.
I don't see it either. Yep, that's fine. Some people, for whatever reason, we don't know why, don't have the option, though, which is why I'm still here. So we'll start in order here. John, which room do you want to go to?
My room.
Which is what, B, right?
Yes.
All right. Sending you down the water slide. Here you go.
Thank you very much.
Matt, can you send me to A?
Yep.
Could you send us to B as well, Brian and Joe?
Yeah. You guys better go there, right?
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Let's see. Let's make sure our speakers are in there. Good. All right. Let's see who we got. Let's see. Sean Kramer. Sean, are you there? And Sherry Patchen. Sherry and Sean, if you guys are having trouble getting there, just speak up, unmute yourself, and let me know if there's a room you'd like to go to.
I would like to go to the multifamily.
All right, here you go. All right. Mike, I guess you're there. You need to go to, well, you're on the next one. So Mike, are you there? Do you want to go to one of the Q&As?
I'm just going to wait until the next one.
Okay. Rob, do you want to go to one of them and have me go to it? What do you think?
Might as well, since we're here anyway.
Okay.
Which one do you go to, so we don't go to the same one?
Well, yeah, I can jump in and out.
That's true. I guess it's kind of float back and forth anyway.
Yeah. Why don't you do that? We'll just flip back and forth. I'll hang out here for a little bit, and then I'll just go to one of the two and roam around.
All right, I'll jump around myself later.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Nice Northern Lights. I love it. Hi, Gerard. How are you?
Well, while Scott's bringing up that slide, I'll apologize to all of those of you in the 2 breakout rooms that might have been in the middle of a conversation when those ended, but we need to keep this on time. So hopefully if we have it, we'll try to, if there's anything that you have and a question for, you can still send it to us and we can still try to get some answers for you if that's the case. So
Thanks, Patty. I was on mute there as I thought I was talking to everybody. And I just wanted to promote our next event on September 30th for soaking up more stormwater. This is going, fingers crossed, to be an in-person event. So we look forward to seeing a lot of our friends and partners at that time. So stay tuned for that. We're going to go to the second breakout session, room C, I believe. Will be Matt, you can tell me how you set these up. I can't see the assignments.
Yes, sure. Yep, social equity is topic C, commercial vacancy is topic D, and I am opening all of the rooms now.
Great. Cut off giving Allison a message. I think he sent you the email, so reach out to Derek.
I got it.
He's a great help. He helps out with our communities all the time.
And thanks everyone for your input and feedback on that. So I appreciate it.
Great. So that's it. We made it. It's been a little long. We're just past 6 o'clock. I want to thank everyone for hanging in there, and I hope it was worth it. We're going to send out a survey in the next day or two. Really quick one, just to get some feedback, see how you liked it, see what any changes you suggest. Look, we appreciate any feedback. So again, thanks for coming out tonight. Check out our website. We've got tons of resources spread all across it, and hopefully you find something there that might help what you're looking at in your communities. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Thank you.